Hello and welcome to another special edition of Newsmakers using a virtual interview. Today we're taking a different approach because I like each year to visit with retiring faculty members. We're able to do it in person this time, so we're doing it through visual computer interviews. So joining me today, Bill Kumbier. Dr. Kumbier, thank you much for being here today.
Oh, thank you, Judy.
You're approaching retirement. One of the things I like to do is honor retiring faculty members each year. This year's the end of your career at Missouri Southern, obviously a very unusual ending to the career, but people probably
Yes.
are asking, what are your feelings as this year is coming to an end?
Well, it's hard for me to be enthusiastic or excited about the retirement because it is so strange. I'm especially missing seeing my students face to face, especially in this last semester when I'm teaching. We've had pretty good communication by email and Blackboard, but it isn't the same. And one course in particular, which I was teaching actually for the first time this semester, a course on, of all things, the Beatles. I had very enthusiastic students, very dedicated, very interested, and it's been sad to me that we can't be there because playing the songs and talking about them face to face was a really big part of the course. But most of them have hung in there, and I've been getting the reports that were required, and they're finishing their projects today. So it worked out all right. I guess I just have to think of the way other semesters have ended maybe a little more positively, and it'll be okay. But this one is a hard one.
Yeah, it's been a challenge for everyone involved this year. I like to start off with these interviews. It's kind of going back to your background, obviously in the English department, but give some little information about what years ago sparked your interest in English. People probably say, well, how did you turn out to be an English professor?
Oh, well, yeah, because it wasn't the money, I'll say that. And it was at that time, it also, I found out, wasn't the job prospects. It was very difficult. No, I knew I wanted to be an English teacher when I started high school. And I thought I would follow, in the footsteps of my parents who were both educators. My mother was a librarian. My dad was a science and math teacher, later a science and math administrator. But almost every aunt and uncle in my family was an educator. So I grew up in a family of teachers, and that helped me make my decision. But when I entered college, which was Michigan State University in 1970, I thought I'd be a high school teacher. And I started my education courses. I took one introductory education course. But then I ran into one of my friends on campus, one of my friends from high school, and she said, well, you really want to be a high school teacher? I said, well, I think that's all I can do. She said, well, if you can teach in college without an education degree, you can teach English. I said, well, that sounds pretty good. So I stuck with it a little while longer, but then just changed my mind and decided I wanted to focus solely on English as my major. There was also a period of a couple of years when I even considered a career in the ministry because I had that interest. And after a couple of years of that, I decided that really I still was interested, but my main interest was in teaching and in literature. So along the way, I picked up some experience with foreign languages. And so when it came time to go to grad school, I was able to go into a program of what's called comparative literature, which is studying literature in more than one language. So I kind of expanded from English to that. And after I finished my work in grad school, took 5 years. I started looking for jobs, and I was able to look for positions that weren't focused only on English and American literature. And that's actually how I ended up at Missouri Southern, because back in 1989, they were looking for someone who could teach world literature courses. And fortunately, along the way, I also picked up some experience with technical and professional writing. It's a very separate field. And they needed someone who could start some courses in that. So I guess it was the combination of interests or abilities, whatever, that got me the job at Missouri Southern, and it's just gone on from there.
Now, you mentioned world literature and foreign languages. Which languages did you get involved with and study?
Well, I'm always careful when I talk about this, because from my experience, I found that I'm not fluent in any foreign language, but I have what's called reading knowledge of German and French and ancient Greek. And those are the languages I've always used in my preparation for classes. But I've been fortunate to go with students a couple of times to France. I have never been to Germany, and there's no call for speaking ancient Greek anymore. So I've found out that, the fluency that other people have, or even some of our students have, is something I lack. But it doesn't keep me from being really interested in trying to read literature in those languages. I guess I can say I proved that I could do it because I passed. I got my degree, but fortunately they didn't quiz me in French or in German. My examinations were in English, so I've tried, but you get to a certain age and it's very difficult to pick up all the speaking, hearing, writing in a foreign language.
Was it advantageous? A lot of those languages mentioned, especially Greek and some of the fourth, reading the classics in the native language. We hear so much about reading some of those literature pieces as they were written.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's essential. I still use, up till the end of this semester, I was still using, for example, the ancient Greek in my world lit classes. Now, I didn't expect anybody who took those classes to know any Greek at all. But when you're working, say, with Homer's Odyssey, it's a very different thing in Greek. It has a sound and a feel that there's nothing like in English. It's really unique. So we always do a day or two of that course talking about that, and I demonstrate for them, what the sound was, what the sound patterns were. To me, that's exciting. It's so different from just reading it as a story. I don't know how many of them get turned on by that, but that was the thing that really got me interested in Homer, for example, is when I found out that if you can read it and sound it out in the original language, it's much more spectacular, much richer than it is in any English translation. It hasn't always sold all my students on Homer, but I think it makes a difference. That's just one example. And it's the same with the other language I've used a lot in teaching is French, and being able to read French poetry out loud in French. I mean, the students can pick up the differences right away. And so I've always been glad that we've been able to teach our world literature courses at Southern, which, after all, for the most part, are survey courses that students choose as part of their general education. I'm always glad that that's been welcome, that we can bring some foreign language experience into the class without making it a course in the foreign language.
Well, tell me a little bit about the study abroad. You mentioned taking some trips abroad with students. So were these based on certain literature themes as you went to the countries?
Well, yes and no. That is probably the most amazing thing about my experience at Southern, and I'll always be grateful for that. I was fortunate enough to be on the committees that started the international mission planning in 1995, a long time ago, but very important. So I had a hand in the curriculum for the international studies major and designing the courses, what the major would be. But because of my interest in that, I had opportunities to travel, including traveling with students, that I never would have had anyplace else. I'm sure of it. The first one was India. I was chosen along with 5 other Missouri Southern faculty members. I think it was 2000, year 2000, to be in the first group of people from Missouri Southern that spent the summer in India. And I was not a teacher actually in that experience, but part of our group included, I think, 12 students, mostly from Missouri Southern. So we learned together, faculty and students learned together in that trip. And then 3 years later, I was invited to do it again, but this time as an advisor to the students. So I didn't really teach them then either, but I had responsibility for watching how they worked and how they were taught and what their connections with the professors in India were. So those were the first 2 times. And then after that, I got involved in this thing that we ultimately became called Literary Paris, where this was an English department program. We linked a course in literature that somehow related to Paris. Either it was French literature or it was literature by other people about Paris. And we spent the semester studying that, and then we ended the semester with a 2-week trip to Paris and one other place in France that had a literary connection. And those trips were great. I think on the first trip we had 10 students, and the second trip maybe 8. But they were exactly tied to literary works, and we would go, for example, and visit the writers' homes or places that were significant. We do readings. It was kind of strange because we'd actually do readings of the literature on the spot where it was said or where the writer composed it. I remember reading a poem by Baudelaire right outside his house. Remember that because it involved unintentional spitting by me because I had to speak so loudly. But also we did things like, what was another one we went to? Oh, the second trip, we went down to the French Alps and we went to the glacier, which plays a big role in the novel Frankenstein. And we were able to read the selections from Frankenstein at the place where it was taking place. It was set, so that was fun. Those are the trips I've had with students. A couple to India and a couple to France, and then also, although they don't always think of it as an international trip, I was able to start an annual trip to Stratford, Ontario, where they have a big theater festival every year, high caliber performances, and it caught on, and for the last 5 years we've had student trips in the summer to the Stratford Festival. Of course, that is not going to happen this year. It's sad, but that's been one I've really liked also.
We hear so much on the study abroad, and obviously the faculty members involved with your observations and how it impacts the students when they are actually, like you say, at that site where the author lived, and maybe they studied about it a whole semester. Now they're actually there. Do you have any reflections on student reaction?
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. It depends on the student. If the students have read the material and really gotten into it and understood it, it really does come alive. My favorite example is we had read the novel The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and which in French is just Notre Dame de Paris. It's just called Notre Dame. And on one of our walks, we passed in front of the great cathedral in Paris, and we read the section of the book that described Quasimodo, the hunchback, scampering up the facade of the cathedral, holding the gypsy girl in his arms, and then eventually getting to the top and holding her up for everyone to see and shouting, "Sanctuary, sanctuary." It really was something to imagine that happening while you're looking at the facade. Now, it doesn't take that much to get my imagination going. I mean, I can just know that a writer was in a particular place and I get excited. But that kind of direct awareness, physical presence, it makes a big difference. It's not as corny as people might think, to visit a writer's house. After all, you're looking at somewhat what the writer looked at.
Right.
You're literally walking the same streets on the same pavement in some cases that the writer walked. Uh, it
Illustration
really,
for their life and what they experienced.
yeah, we walked from Hemingway's apartment in Paris to his studio apartment, or to the Luxembourg Gardens where he spent a lot of time. And there's really only one way you can walk to get there. So you're walking in this case, Hemingway's footsteps. Or another good example, this was very exciting to me. I know my students will say, "Dr. Kumbier, get a life." But it was exciting to me. We went to an apartment where a couple of women who ran a bookstore in Paris lived. And as we were going up the stairs to that apartment, our guide told us that if we put our hands on the hand railing, we were putting our hands on the same railing that James Joyce and Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald used when they were going to parties in this apartment. So I thought that was pretty exciting.
Really brings things to life for people.
Yeah.
Really does make a difference there. Well, earlier you mentioned the technical writing side of things.
Yeah.
People might be curious, and explain what is involved in technical writing for people who are English.
Well, technical writing is writing for technical fields, the kind of writing you need to do in science and engineering. And it requires a lot of accuracy, a lot of specificity, and it has to be as concise as possible and as clear as possible. I got my preparation for doing that in a job I had for a little over 6 years with the legislature in Michigan. While I was trying to get an academic job, I worked as a writer and analyst for the Michigan Senate, and it was a nonpartisan office. So we had to be as objective as we could, but we had to report fully on any legislation that the Senate was considering. And that could be in any field. My very first assignment was to write an analysis of a bill about the terrible contamination of cattle feed in Michigan. It was a terrible crisis. It was the PBB crisis of the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not mentioned much now, but at the time it was just terrible. And from that assignment on, I had to learn to speak in the language that people who really understood that crisis were speaking. So in my 6 years there, I got familiar with all kinds of professional and technical language and jargon that most of us don't worry about most of the time, including a lot of legal language that we had to translate into plain English. So I happened to apply to Iowa State University, which, as you know, specializes in science and technology. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get an offer for a full-time permanent position in the English department there, but they liked that I could teach technical writing because there are so many engineers there who have to learn to communicate in writing effectively with their colleagues. And so for 3 years, I had 3 courses a semester filled with engineers, and we learned how to do scientific descriptions, how to describe technical processes, how to write convincing proposals, how to do technical reports. People may be surprised that you don't really have to know the science to do that. You have to know how to write clearly, and you have to know how to ask a lot of questions. So I loved that because, if I didn't understand what a student was writing, I could just ask them and we'd talk about it, and I'd learn something about their field. Electrical engineering was the hardest for me. Chemical engineering and nuclear engineering were fun. Mechanical engineering was okay. But I would learn about all their specialties while they were learning how to write. I was kind of like a coach for them. They had their own projects, and I just coached them on the writing. But Missouri Southern wanted to try doing that. And as I said before, that was one of the reasons I got hired, I believe, was that I had that experience. Thankfully, now we have Dr. Joey Brown, and she has taken all that over, and I don't have to think about that much anymore. The reason I say that is that the field has advanced so much in terms of software and publication, desktop publication, so on. I'm not trained for that, and so we're lucky now to have someone who can do that well. But I did teach both technical writing and professional writing at Missouri Southern several times before Dr. Brown came along.
You mentioned the changes in technology. All fields have been affected by it. Just the writing aspect, probably for the early days, you had stacks of papers people would turn in. Now, obviously you have computers and ways for people to present their papers to you.
Well, I'm going to make a confession. I still have stacks of papers in front of me because even though I understand how to do it, I've never liked correcting papers online. I don't like the review function in Word. So I still ask for, I still like to work from a hard copy. Now, in the last few weeks, of course, I've been printing out all those copies, and I won't give you the details of my copy paper bill or my ink expenses, but I've been printing out lots of papers here at home. But you're right. It is very different. In fact, here's a connection between technical writing and world literature. When we talk about Homer's poems, we worry about, or not worry, but we wonder about how they came to be written down, because we know they started simply as stories that were told and heard, not written. So we have to decide, if they were written down, when were they written down? When could they have been written down? And the whole problem comes down to the fact that over about 100 years, between 750 and 650 BC, the Greeks learned to write. And I asked the students, do you think it's possible that someone who was really good at reciting, retelling these stories could learn in his or her lifetime how to use this new tool called writing? You need an alphabet, and they didn't have an alphabet, and then they suddenly had one. Mm-hmm. So I said, I think it's possible, because in my lifetime, I had to learn to print. Then I had to learn cursive. Right. Then I had to learn to type in a tortuous high school typing class, which my parents insisted that I take to prepare for college. In college, I typed everything on a Smith Corona typewriter. When I went to work for the Senate, I had a better typewriter, but still a typewriter. And then all of a sudden, these things appeared in our offices called word processors. And they were the prototypes of our computers. They were computers. Mm-hmm. And I was trained, I think, 3 times to use a computer, and before I actually had one to use. And some of your audience will remember, the screens were black with green letters and numbers.
Right.
So I had to learn that. And then when I arrived at Missouri Southern, lo and behold, we had no computers in our offices. I think that went on till about, 93 or 94. It took a while for us all to have computers in our offices. So counting them up, I think I've learned to write about 5 or 6 times. And I guess what happened in the last few years is I just really didn't want to learn much more. So my computer skills are okay. I managed to get to this interview. But in my lifetime, I've had to learn to write 6 different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's amazing to me. I mean, just the one course that I teach every spring, the freshman composition 2 course, the way students do their research and can write their papers is so different from 1989, 1990. I can't even, it's very hard for me even to think back on those early years and what we had to go through to get those research papers done.
Right.
Now maybe we've gone to the other extreme where sometimes people think that the internet has absolutely everything that you need, and they don't go much further than that. But the ability to have all that information available at home and with connections to the library's resources is just a whole different scene.
Right. Everything has changed so much over
Yeah.
the years. Well, you've had an extensive career, a lot of contributions to Missouri Southern. I want to thank you. I'm sure if we were in person, people at Southern would like to say thank you as well for your career and what you've done for Missouri Southern and the many students that you've touched over the years.
Well, it's been, on the whole, a really great experience, a huge part of my life. And I really don't know if what I'll do on June 1st. I know I won't be teaching right away, but I'm not sure that I won't teach again sometime in the future. So
it's hard to put everything together. And I know you're involved in the community as well, so that will continue community involvement as well.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah.
So, well, thank you very much for joining me today and sharing with our audience. And once again, good luck in retirement, and thank you for your time at Missouri Southern and working with us.
Thank you very much, Judy. I appreciate your taking time to talk with me.
And I'd like to thank the viewers for joining us again for this special edition of Newsmakers. Hope you can join us again. Thank you.